This is BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. British Prime Minister Theresa May puts her Brexit vote on the back burner. Where does this leave the UK's withdrawal from the European Union?
It is clear that this House faces a much more fundamental question. Does this House want to deliver Brexit?
Meanwhile, there's more turmoil at the White House. President Trump's on the hunt for a new chief of staff as he prepares to part ways with General John Kelly.
Your cousin Mary has returned to rule in Scotland. She is formidable.
And a battle of two monarchs. We speak with the lead actresses in the new film about Mary, Queen of Scots, and her cousin Elizabeth. Welcome to World News America. With just months to go before the UK withdraws from the European Union, British Prime Minister Theresa May postponed a vote on her Brexit plan, which was due on Tuesday. Speaking to Parliament, she conceded she didn't have the support to push it through, including from her own party. Mrs May will now go back to EU leaders in the hope of finding a way forward. Speaking before a rowdy House of Commons, Mrs May was jeered and heckled. Some have called for her to go. Others want a second referendum on the EU, something the Prime Minister has dismissed.
Many of the most controversial aspects of this deal, including the backstop, are simply inescapable facts of having a negotiated Brexit. Those members who continue to disagree need to shoulder the responsibility of advocating an alternative solution that can be delivered, and do so without ducking its implications. So if you want a second referendum to overturn the result of the first, be honest that this risks dividing the country again.
Well, the BBC's Christian Fraser's been following today's events in Parliament and he joins us now. Christian, quite a dramatic day. What have people been saying to you in Westminster today?
Well, on the Conservative benches, they're happy that Theresa May's finally listening, because they've been telling her for the last week that this vote was unwinnable, but perhaps a little frustrated that it's taken so long for it to come round to their position. 164 MPs have spoken in the course of this debate over the last few days, and now they won't get a vote on the debate that they've heard. So on the Labour benches, they're very unhappy about that, and they forced an emergency Brexit debate tomorrow, but that's non-binding on the government. And in the meantime, Theresa May heads off to Europe again to try and get something that would reassure her wavering backbenchers. But it's difficult to see at this moment, Rajini, what she can get that will force them to vote the way she wants, because Donald Tusk has said, look, we can meet on Thursday, we'll call Thursday a Brexit summit if you want in Brussels, but we're not reopening the withdrawal agreement, because if we do that, everybody else will pile in and it will all be unpicked. And of course it's taken them 2 years to this point to get the deal over the line.
And Christian, that date in March is set in stone. By the end of March, the UK will leave the European Union. So what happens now? Unless
they can get some statute to replace the Withdrawal Act, which they passed earlier in the year, and in that Withdrawal Act is the date that the UK will leave the European Union. You've got to replace statute with statute. Now, probably there is a majority in the House of Commons to stop that, or to stop no deal. You know, you could probably pull together Labour MPs and some Conservative MPs to stop the process. But the big question is what happens next? The Prime Minister's adamant that they have to respect the vote, over 17 million people voting to leave. But as the Father of the House said today, the House of Commons has broken into various factions and there is no majority for any way forward, so they can delay it. The big question is, what do they move to? And at the moment, when you look at it, all those options are live. No deal, the Prime Minister's deal, a referendum and a general election. Any one of them is possible at this moment in time.
And I know it's difficult, but if you had to put your money on it, what do you think the odds are of two things, Christian? First of all, Theresa May being in her job in March, and of a second referendum being tabled?
I'm not a betting man. I don't think at the moment there is a majority in the House of Commons for a second vote, although there is a lot more noise about it. And maybe either a general election or a referendum at the very end of the day, when everything is played out, maybe that's the only way you can get out of the political mess that there is in the House of Commons. We'll see. In terms of the leadership debate, interesting, we had 5 Conservative MPs with us through the course of this evening. Not one of them talked about a challenge, but will there be a challenge when she's come back from Brussels? They're prepared to give her some time to go back and try and negotiate, but if she comes back and there's nothing really that's satisfying, nothing that's legally binding that would prevent this Irish backstop from being put in place, you know, to stop a hard border in Ireland, if there's nothing legally binding, then we're in the same position next week. And at what point do they say, look, this is her deal, she is the problem, we need to get rid of her? That's the big question.
So many questions, Christian Fraser. Thanks very much for joining us there. Now, for more on where things stand with Brexit, I'm joined now by Ed Luce, the US national editor for the Financial Times here in Washington. Well, Ed, thanks for coming in. As Christian was saying there are so many uncertainties around Brexit. But watching this from the other side of the pond, so to speak, how do you think people are looking at what's going on in the UK right now?
I think they're seeing the extraordinary sort of self-destruction or potential self-destruction of one of the world's oldest, most stable, most pragmatic, commonsensical democracies. And they're watching with mouths agape. This is not the pragmatic British way. I think the expectation that Britain could go off a cliff is now becoming very, very real. And it's clearly, as America's closest partner in Europe and as you know, a clear sort of step up to the plate NATO ally, this is a very bewildering sight to observe. It's not the Britain America thinks it knows. It's not, for that matter, the Britain that people from Britain thought that they knew.
So how do you think this affects the UK's relationship with the US and indeed, of course, with Europe going forward?
Well, I mean, one of the great claims of those who supported Brexit was that there would be a big US-UK trade deal as a result of it. Clearly, the deal that Theresa May is putting, well, not putting to the House of Commons anymore because she knows it would fail, would preclude that opportunity. And Donald Trump himself actually said that, very unhelpfully for Theresa May. He actually pointed out Britain wouldn't be able to negotiate a deal with America. So I think there is a complete perplexity here about what kind of Britain would emerge from this. And as Christian's just been pointing out, there is an understanding here as well that the radical uncertainty that we're faced with in Britain of the potential outcomes, staying in Europe at the end of this, potentially, crashing out a no deal and having a serious, deep, self-induced recession in 2019, or least likely, I think now, that Parliament votes for Theresa May's option. Any of these options are possible, and they produce very different relationships with the United States, depending on which Britain stumbles into.
You mentioned financial uncertainty. The pound's fallen once again. Where does this leave the global financial situation?
Look, I think people from Britain would like to think it's a major contributor to the global economy. I'd say that it's a tenth as important as the US-China trade relationship. Clearly, May would like to think that the markets are going to pressure her party, the Conservative Party, to vote for her deal, that the panic in the markets are going to concentrate minds, if you like, in the same way, a little bit like what happened with the TARP vote in 2008, when the Republican Speaker, John Boehner, helped vote it down. The markets then crashed. He then, 3 days later, brought it to a second vote, and his Republican troops fell in line and passed TARP. I don't think that this is the equivalent. I think the markets have already priced in a British ability to self-harm, and therefore the lesson that the market could potentially give that would enable May to get this through is probably much more limited than that. That analogy probably doesn't hold. But the pound is in free fall, and until May finds a solution or somebody replaces her with a credible solution, it's going to keep falling.
And who knows when that solution will come. Ed Luce from the Financial Times, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, speculation's been swirling here in Washington over who will take over as Donald Trump's next White House Chief of Staff. Mr. Trump announced that General John Kelly will be stepping down by the end of December after a tumultuous year and a half on the job. Whoever takes his place will have to deal with the latest legal issues surrounding his presidency. Playboy model Karen McDougal and porn star Stormy Daniels both claimed they had affairs with Donald Trump. Both were paid by his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, to stay silent. Cohen will be sentenced this week for campaign finance violations. Court documents say the hush money was used to influence the outcome of the election. Donald Trump's always denied the affairs, and in the past, the payments.
Did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels?
No.
Now, in a Monday morning tweet, the president's denying he's broken campaign finance laws. He said there's no collusion, describing the payment as a private transaction. Democrats say it's a serious matter.
Certainly they'd be impeachable offenses because even though they were committed before the president became president, they were committed in the service of fraudulently obtaining the office. That would be that would be an impeachable offense.
For now, the president's focusing on his job. At the weekend, he visited the Army-Navy college football game. In politics as well as sport, he surrounded himself with members of the military, hiring many to his team. One of them, General John Kelly, is on his way out. He was picked for the role in July 2017 to bring order to a chaotic White House.
He will do a spectacular job, I have no doubt.
How things change. Mr. Kelly's now stepping down amid reports he's no longer on speaking terms with the president.
We'll be announcing who will be taking John's place. It might be on an interim basis. I'll be announcing that over the next day or two.
Nick Ayres, who's currently Chief of Staff to Vice President Mike Pence, was widely tipped, but has ruled himself out. Current names on the shortlist include Republican Congressman Mark Meadows, Budget Director Mick Mulvaney, and Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker. The ongoing Russia investigation and dealing with a new Congress are two challenges they'll face. But above all, it's about keeping Donald Trump happy. There's no doubt Chief of Staff is one of the toughest jobs in politics. Well, for more on what's happening at the White House these days, I'm joined by Alexis Simondinger, national political correspondent for The Hill. Great to have you with us, Alexis. Lots to chew over.
Lots to talk about.
Let's start with the Chief of Staff vacancy that's soon coming up. Everyone thought that Nick Ayres, who worked for Vice President Pence, or still does, was going to take that top job. Now he's not. How difficult is it going to be to get the right candidate for this role?
Well, you can tell already that unrolling or unveiling did not go as planned, and it is going to be a tough job to fill. In previous presidencies, we've seen that it's not unusual to change your chief of staff, but you usually get it all prepared beforehand and make the announcement where you're making the change. In this case, President Trump has a couple of things that are stiff headwinds. One is we know Congress is going to give the president and the White House a real going over next year. And any candidate knows that. They know that the president himself is very mercurial and it's difficult. Some chiefs of staff might think that they're going to have to hire personal attorneys. And they know that the politics is foremost in the president's mind in addition to the Mueller probe. And if you put all of those things together, it's extra difficult for a candidate to say, gee, I really want to do this job.
So it's a tough job at the moment with all of those things going on. Let's talk about the other tough challenges facing the president at the moment. We referred in that report then to the president's, or the payment that was made by the president's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, to two women. The president's now tweeted saying it was just a private transaction. How safe is that as a defence?
Well, what's interesting is that the word you used was defense, and that's the right description because he's been named as individual one. The president is not denying that. It's been made clear in the documents presented that he is that person. And he's suggesting already what his defense is, that he was what he described as making a personal defense, in almost conceding that he had a relationship, or he was conceding to the idea that he had to make a payment in order to change the dynamics. His argument from his attorneys is that he wanted to maintain the privacy maybe with his family or his wife or his business, not necessarily that he was making a campaign donation. And so you can see the defense is both legal and personal after denying all of it and then inch by inch conceding all of it. So you can see he's in jeopardy.
And now you have Democrats using the I word again, impeachment. They're going to be taking over the House of Representatives. How much do you think this changes the game, these payments?
Well, it's just one of a million things that House Democrats are beginning to rub their hands together and hope that they're going to get a chance to conduct oversight or investigations about. it's not just the Mueller probe or the Justice Department exploring the president's business, but you can see that the House Democrats are already willing to talk about not just impeachment, but jail time for the president, very presumptively before they're even indoctrinated into the majority, beginning to talk about what the repercussions could be, and you can see the president's very agitated about it.
And very briefly, obviously we had more documents last week relating to the Mueller investigation. A lot of speculation about when something might come back. What's your best guess now?
Well, it seems that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, thinks that he's going to be at this for months into the new year. At least he's suggested that with deadlines to the court, and I think that that's a reasonable expectation.
Alexis Mendinga, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.
So, as the speculation grows as to who Mr. Trump will pick as his next chief of staff, it's worth taking a closer look at the job itself. What exactly does a chief of staff do for the president, the White House, and indeed the nation? Well, for more on all of that, let's bring in Chris Whipple, author of The Gatekeepers: How the White House Chiefs of Staff Define Every Presidency. Great to have you with us, Mr. Whipple. Your book is all about how the White House Chief of Staff defines a presidency. How do you think President Trump has defined the role since he's been in office?
Well, serving as White House Chief of Staff to Donald Trump is unlike serving any of his predecessors. In fact, you have to wonder why anybody in his right mind would want to apply for the job. You know, James A. Baker III, who was Ronald Reagan's quintessential White House Chief of Staff, liked to tell his successors, he would always say the same thing. He'd say, "Congratulations, you have the worst blanking job in government." It's relentless, it's brutal, it's 24/7. And with Donald Trump in particular, it's thankless because Donald Trump doesn't want anyone in the room who will tell him what he does not want to hear. That is the most important part of the White House chief's job. And we can talk about all the other ways in which it's such a critical position in the U.S. government.
And what are those ways? I mean, how important is it for a president to get the chemistry and the choice right?
It's absolutely critical. You know, every president learns, sometimes the hard way, that you cannot govern effectively without empowering a White House Chief of Staff to execute your agenda and, as I said before, most importantly, tell you what you don't want to hear. There would have been arguably no Reagan revolution without James A. Baker III with his enormous skill at managing to pass legislation. There probably would have been no second term for Bill Clinton without Leon Panetta, who became his second chief of staff a year and a half in, and really turned the Clinton White House around. So it's a critical job. It's not just the gatekeeper who controls access to the Oval Office. It's somebody who executes the president's agenda, who knows how to count votes on Capitol Hill. And also, by the way, it's someone who helps the president figure out that there's a difference between campaigning and governing. Unfortunately, that's a lesson Donald Trump has failed to learn. And he needs a strong chief, in my view, to help him to get something done.
And yet, Chris, he's not the first president to go through a number of different chiefs of staff, is he?
No, there's nothing unusual about that. And in fact, Barack Obama had 5, if you count Pete Rouse, who was an interim chief of staff. Ronald Reagan had 4. Bill Clinton had 4. There's nothing extraordinary about that. What's extraordinary in this case is we have a president in Donald Trump who, A, doesn't understand the nature of the position, and who, B, is convinced that he can run the White House the way he ran the 26th floor of Trump Tower, with people coming and going and, in effect, running his own White House. You know, interestingly, there are probably no two people on the face of the earth more dissimilar than Jimmy Carter and Donald Trump. And yet they both made the same mistake. Jimmy Carter thought he was so smart that he could run the White House essentially by himself. It took him almost until his last year in office to really empower a White House chief. And it was too late for Jimmy Carter. Donald Trump is headed in the same direction.
Chris Whipple, thanks so much for sharing your insights. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme, Emmanuel Macron goes on TV promising a rise in the minimum wage and tax concessions. But is it enough to end weeks of violent protests in France? New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has apologised to the family of British tourist Grace Millane over her death. The backpacker went missing from a hostel in Auckland on the 1st of December on the eve of her 22nd birthday. Her body was found in an area of bush north of the city on Sunday. A 26-year-old man's been charged with murder and appeared in court on Monday. Here was Jacinda Ardern's message for Miss Millane's family shortly after the hearing.
You know, from the Kiwis I have spoken to, there is this overwhelming sense of hurt and shame that this has happened in our country, a place that prides itself on our hospitality, on our manaakitanga, especially to those who are visiting our shores. And so, on behalf of New Zealand, I want to apologise to Grace's family. Your daughter should have been safe here, and she wasn't, and I'm sorry for that.
French President Emmanuel Macron's promised to raise the minimum wage and offered a series of tax concessions after weeks of violent protests swept the country. The BBC's Lucy Williamson has more from Paris.
It's not easy to spot what divides people here. Their politics kept hidden under their neon protest uniforms. Voters from both far left and far right, brought together by a president who promised to unite France. After weeks of demanding a response to their protest, Mr. Macron addressed the nation today. Some said they wouldn't even bother to watch. Why should I listen to him, Helena said. He doesn't listen to us. Mr. Macron spent the day listening to proposals, a new, humbler image, or just a smart political move. The task for Emmanuel Macron today is to show humility and concern. Economic concessions alone may not work. What protesters want, many say, is a sense the president values them. What he offered today were 4 concessions: a rise in the minimum wage, tax-free overtime and bonuses, and a freeze in pension taxes. What he didn't say was sorry.
I know that I've hurt some of you with my remarks. I want to be very clear with you. If I have fought to shake up the system, it's precisely because I want to serve our country, which I love.
His concessions today were more than anyone could have imagined just a few weeks ago. But to some protesters in Amiens, it wasn't enough.
He tried to make us believe he regrets his behaviour, but he didn't respond to our demands, and tonight we've lost trust. It feels like we're talking to a brick wall. Frankly, we're frustrated.
Protesters here are already booking a bus back to Paris on Saturday for Act 5 of the weekly demonstrations there. President Macron told them today that France would find a solution together. But to many, this is what solidarity looks like, not Macron and his economic reforms. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Now, a new film chronicles a 16th century power struggle between 2 strong female leaders. Mary, Queen of Scots, explores the relationship between Queen Mary of Scotland and Elizabeth I. Will Gompertz has gone to meet the film's stars.
Mary Stuart is condemned to death.
Saoirse Ronan is Mary, Queen of Scots. Margot Robbie plays Queen Elizabeth, her English cousin. It's thought the 2 monarchs never actually met.
She has prevailed. If you speak of it to anyone, I shall deny.
But they do in an emotionally charged scene in the Josie Rourke-directed film, which they talked to me about at the National Portrait Gallery in London, where the 2 queens now hang together.
So Margot, how did you feel about taking on Elizabeth, the role which has been played so many times by so many different actresses?
The short answer is yes, I was terrified, but I'm very glad I did it, and I stayed away from watching anyone else's portrayal. To begin with, I'd said to Josie, like, I'm not the right actress for this. I didn't go to university, I don't have a degree, I didn't do theatre, I'm not classically trained. I'm the wrong kind of actress to play a queen. And she said, I don't want you to play a queen, I want you to play a young woman. And that unlocked the character for me in a big way.
What have you produced in all your travels between our kingdoms? Discord? War? Death?
It's so timely as well, because like we've got Nicola Sturgeon up north, we've got Theresa May down south, and there's essentially our film is mirroring the same sort of dynamic that's happening between North and South right now, and these two women in particular.
Do not play into their hands. Your heart has more within it than the men who counsel you.
You would do well to watch your words.
I will not be scolded by my inferior.
You're inferior.
The more I started to learn about her, the more sort of outraged I was that so many accounts in history had painted her out to be this sort of young, way in over her head girl. To see the tenacity that this woman had and how she just had it for so long, and like, it wasn't, I mean, really, in order to restrain her, they had to come up with lies about her and put her under house arrest for 18 years because she was just unstoppable.
Reckless child! On the face of it, this film is a classic costume drama to sit back and enjoy. But the way in which the story has been told, with Mary and Elizabeth constantly undermined by meddling men in a divided country at odds with itself, makes it resonate today in a way a lot of modern dramas simply do not. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. Thanks for watching World News America.